Welcome, everyone. I'm Tim with Exceptional Individuals, and today's session will be on CVs and Beyond. As you're all aware, first question, what do you want to get out of this session? Tips about marketing myself? Yes, we will touch upon personal branding at the back end, how to write my CV for careers as a neurodivergent person. Yes, absolutely. We can speak about things like disclosure and strengths, tips around how to describe myself better. Okay, absolutely. Yes. Same sort of thing. How to disclose neurodiversity on a CV? Absolutely. Some ideas on how to improve my CV? Absolutely. How to manage workspace adjustments? That won't necessarily be covered here so much. How to address it with an employer, I can touch upon, but I think there's actually an upcoming interview stage session in your future, and that's probably where that's going to come in. Also, an assistive technology session, I believe. But essentially, you're in the right place, which is always a bonus. How to fill gaps in my CV? Yes, it's a very good point. We can touch upon that too. All right. So me, myself, and my CV. We'll briefly cover purpose of a CV, style of a CV, content of a CV, and tips and tricks regarding the CV specifically, which some of you already asked about. Then we'll move on to beyond the CV. Okay. Purpose of a CV. Introduction to you and your skills. What can you do? Evidence of your past current experience, what have you done, and demonstration of your future trajectory. What are you going to do? Essentially, that's what an employer wants to be able to extract from your CV and not much else. Who you are, what you've done, what you can do, and what you will do. All right. Style. What should a CV look like? By the way, some of you are going to, of course, know backwards in platform shoes, but this is a session for everybody, hopefully. The content that will be meaningful to you will occur as we continue. Personally, I feel that a refresher is always useful anyway. Interestingly, we have a bit of a fight between red and yellow. 3 for 2. That's interesting because I would personally say it's 2. But of course, if you absolutely can't fit it on 2, the question becomes, do you need to use everything? If the answer you come to is yes, then of course it can be 3. However, the argument is that if someone sees a longer CV, even if they are looking for experience subconsciously, it might be saying to them, oh, I'll get the other ones out the way first, or they don't know how to format a CV properly. We're going to assume bias just for the sake of simplicity throughout this session. But of course, a lot of the systems or a lot of the people that you'll be dealing with regarding the process for hiring won't necessarily be biased. It's just so that we know what worst case scenario looks like. All right. Next up is, what font would you use? This is a personal choice. It's not a trick question. Interestingly, sans serif fonts, as in fonts without spikes, are becoming more and more the norm, but previously it was serif, as in with the spikes, assuming I'm getting that the right way around. However, 2 places notably where serif fonts like Times New Roman are still quite common are newspapers and CVs. So in other words, there is no wrong answer here, but typically society in general, at least in the West, seems to be moving towards spikeless fonts. It's exactly even. We got 5 and 5. Regarding a CV, that's absolutely fine. However, the general consensus these days is spikeless fonts are easier to read for everyone. Typically tends to be the norm. For example, the impact font, although that's probably too thick, and the Gill Sans is closer to what someone might go with these days. But again, on CV, absolutely a personal choice. Content. Obviously, we'll spend a bit of time here because it's important. This is still in regards to content, but what is your highest career level? This is asking, what position have you held, just to get a feel for the room. Okay, it looks like we've got a bit of a mix, which is always good. However, it also brings forward the invisible question about career progression. Again, that might not come up at the end, but some of you might feel that you've been passed over in the past, and so perhaps should have reached one of these levels. And hopefully this course will start to remedy that barrier. Okay, we've got quite a cluster, mostly on the right side. Good to know. What are some of your most used buzzwords? What we're talking about here is industry language or colloquial language that comes up as standard usage. We've got a lot of phrases that are still used to this day that might be somewhat outdated. Things like pushing the envelope and so on. Of course, a lot of new language has dropped in recently based on current technology and also the lockdown. Lockdown, of course, being one of those phrases. But video conferencing, a much more common phrase these days as well. Let's see what we've come up with. Yep, quick win, definitely. Some of this is just generalized language, and we'll get on to that. And it's recommended not to use generalized language. For instance, team player is both. The one I mentioned, straw man, definitely current colloquial language, definitely a buzz phrase. Whereas some of the others, attention to detail, self-start is another good one, but attention to detail, flexible, that's what I regard as general language. I'm going to recommend against using general language in and of itself for low solidarity, because A, everyone says the same thing, and B, it doesn't actually give you a feel. But thank you everyone for participating. This is really good stuff. Hybrid working. Yes, that's another phrase. I'm glad we're all on the same page. And I'm not going to recommend specific language for you to use, just to understand that A, avoid general language on its own, and B, be aware of the current phrases, particularly, of course, in your industry. Low-hanging fruit is more of a colloquial one. It's still commonly used in reviews and things, not so much in the workplace though, but that's excellent stuff. All right, how would you rate yourself on the soft skills in terms of these supplementary abilities? Where do you put yourself? Again, it's going to create a spread. It's just to get a look. There we go. That's what we're looking for. Communication and time management, as you can see, the lowest of the batch. Leadership, being dragged away a bit as well. This probably makes sense to your personal circumstances, as in some of you can probably also relate to people not putting time management as a strength. That's not one we're touching upon today, but the attention to detail is somewhat relevant to CV. References to things like communication and teamwork is relevant to CV. But this is very useful regardless. And it shows there are some shared spaces in terms of those of us attending today. Now, the hard skills, quote unquote, on the subject of language earlier, soft skills being one of those. These I can or I can't do things. Where do we fall on these? Once again, just seeing if there's any great synergy Office is given, although I'm sure there's a few people that shied away. As for the others, it all seems like a 50-50 spread. I'm starting to push towards administration. That's interesting. Very interesting, because that's an area a lot of us struggle with. And that, of course, includes self-administration, such as CVs. Everything else seems as I would expect. So I'll move on. Additional on the subject of content. So education, someone mentioned gaps. If you have gaps in education, if it's in the English and the math, I would recommend pursuing it ASAP. Obviously, it doesn't have to be a GCSE. You just need to find out what equivalents are available, but I would seek those out of your own accord. If you haven't done it or haven't received it by the time you're sending out CVs, just put pending. It's better than nothing in terms of the fact that you will have it, and you never know, someone might be willing to overlook that. However, if it's not there at all, that can be regarded as a red flag. Obviously, have a well-formatted CV. Not just having the content and the style correct, but making sure that it's uncluttered, spaced properly, spacious in general is typically important, because otherwise it becomes hard to read. Anything that's hard to read is less likely to be read. And consistent formatting. Do a top to bottom. Decide what format you're using before you begin, or figure out what format your template uses. Do a top to bottom sweep and make sure those are consistent, both before and after. This is really important. Give actual information. Provide not necessarily statistical, not necessarily date-based, but they'll want hard evidence that you can do what they need you to do. The best way to do that is to express your former achievements. Not only that, express it in a way that's quantifiable. Really important. Consider who to contact. We've all been through the online systems, and they're not necessarily particularly user-friendly. We don't necessarily get response back. So if there is anything that you're particularly interested in, particularly if you think you'll be good at it, then research that company and find out who to target specifically. So rather than just going through the standard system, try floating your CV to particular individuals. Also, talk to friends and family and colleagues and see if there are any leads that you can generate that way. Unfortunately, it's all on us. Getting out there is required in order to make the best of it, because in honesty, many of us who are doing okay for ourselves now didn't get our roles through standard means. For instance, in my case, I was in communication of exceptional individuals ahead of being offered a job at exceptional individuals. All right, so if we start at the bottom, what to include in the cover letter, similar to what we discussed about what the purpose of a CV is, what is the purpose of a cover letter? They want to know how and why you're getting in touch. They want to know specifically your interest. They want to know whether you can meet their interests. They want to know if you have proof of that. It's always advisable to make it personalized rather than seem like something you've sent to 100 people. These are the keys. I'm not saying that this is a perfect cover letter by any means. This is the most basic, but if you have this, then you can be confident. Starting with how and why, as you can see here, we're clearly expressing how we know who this person is and why we're reaching out. Reference to our interest specifically, we're identifying that will match their needs in terms of the current projects. Here we're backing that up with previous examples. Lastly, once again, the personalization element. Of course, tone is a factor as well. As you can see, this is semi-formal, also expressing a personal interest, hence a semi. But hopefully the colorization helps with making sure that you hit all the beats. I would recommend that approach when you're plotting it out yourself. Also, if you type in the perfect CV online, you will get dozens of offers of systems that will take you through the process. If you struggle to create prose manually from top to bottom, there are applications available. Also, with the increase of home AI, for instance, of using Grammarly Go, that can at least potentially help with the tone. All right, things that I may have missed in regards to the previous sections. Obviously, in terms of your language in the CV, don't be negative. Don't be speaking down about yourself. Obviously, there's the old advice, convert weaknesses into strengths. What this means is if you do need to point out that you're missing something or that something isn't fast for you or naturally intuitive for you, whatever it might be, but disclose or not. On this subject, it's completely up to you. In terms of phrasing, there are different ways of doing that. I personally do that myself in the same place as well. But if you wanted to do it right bottom as well in a more about me or something like that, then you absolutely could. It's completely up to you. In terms of should you, I argue yes, even if it's just a one-off reference, so that it doesn't strike them as surprising when you mention it at an interview, and so that you're less concerned to mention it at interview. But it is completely up to you. Of course, there are several places where you can potentially mention it, two of which being CV and interview. These days, a lot of people like to develop stylized CVs using templates. This is fine. But for example, if you're using Canva, which is increasing in popularity at the moment, some of these templates can be quite cluttered or overly stimulating. Do bear that in mind. Keep it as simple as possible. 2, some CV systems can only read certain formats. So be careful that you're sticking to the acceptable formats. Typically, a doc or a PDF will work with anything, but they will also list what they can and can't do. Just do bear that in mind too. Other ways, keep it clean, section headers, so on and so on. Yeah, now we'll just talk for a few minutes on beyond the CV. As we mentioned, a lot of things are unavoidable, but firstly, a lot of those are to do more with personality or traits or work performance and reputation than they are branding. Regardless to all of the other things, personal branding can be controlled and it can be a positive. Also, there's an old expression, fake it until you make it. On hand, I don't like it because in quick translation, it sounds like it's saying lie through your teeth. On the other hand, if you dissect it a bit further, to me, what I take it to mean is, even if you're not working at the moment, get up at 7 and put your suit on anyway. In other words, keep your skills sharp. Always keep progressing forward. What will your next step be based on today's content? Hopefully this has either given someone an idea of something they can try they haven't already, or inspired them. Let's see what pops up here. Update my CV. Thank you for that, whoever. Looking at my CV and updating it, and anything applies. Okay. Back to the point about specific details. Does anyone have anything to offer? All right. Refresh my CV. Okay. Need to rethink my personal branding. Thank you. Will you have a session for freelancers? I think services of that nature might be pending, but they're not fully developed yet. We will touch upon freelance, and I was freelance for a long time, in other sessions as well. For instance, the interview session could include something on that, but right now, nothing dedicated to it, I'm afraid. Consider my personal branding, work out how to talk about career overlap. Yes, very good point there. This is a ridiculous thing to say, but don't be nervous. They need information, so we should be viewing it as giving them the information they need. If someone says, can you hand me that? I just do this. I don't question it. So under these circumstances, it should be the same thing. Why is there a gap? Can you explain this? I found this curious. No matter what way they phrase it, we should already know what the answer is. View it as reactions to hit. They've said this, it's triggered this. At least in regards to this element, try that. For those of you who do suffer from nervousness or difficulty clarifying your thoughts, get it all prepped in advance and just know when to shoot, and see if that works out any better for you. All right. So what happens next? For those that feel that they need more support, there are paid for services available through Exceptional Individuals where we can actually walk you through this. Also, if you do get an offer, contact either Exceptional Individuals or Access to Work immediately regarding a workplace needs assessment, so that can already be in your manager's hands by the time you start the role, which should give you a leg up in terms of seeking and receiving further support. There's the process for that, should it come about. For those of you attending the entire course, you will hear from me again. Until then, best wishes and good day.